Fear spread quickly among residents as explosions echoed across the city. Drone interceptions scattered debris across neighborhoods in Erbil. Homes were left with shattered windows and walls marked by shrapnel as residents surveyed the damage. Many say they were caught completely off guard.
So I woke up around 2:45 a.m. to one of the loudest bangs I've ever heard of in my life. It was an explosion. And so I quickly jump up and I see like all my windows are broken. And so then I go outside and I just see like a bunch of people, like 20, 30 men, soldiers, who are just, looking for something. I don't know what it is. I think they were looking for the drone.
Another resident described returning home only to discover his house heavily damaged by falling drone fragments. A stark reminder that civilians are now being dragged into the conflict.
Honestly, it is hard feeling. I mean, it is not about the financial aspect of it, but it is about the fact that you go for a journey and come back to see this disaster, that you are being a victim of a catastrophic incident. This war that we have nothing to do with it. We are not responsible for it, we are not a part of it, and we were not the cause of it. We just pay the price for something we didn't do.
The militia group behind the attacks says its fighters have carried out nearly 30 operations in the past 24 hours, launching dozens of drones and missiles at enemy bases. The group also claims it shot down a US MQ-9 drone in Iraq's Salah al-Din province. The attacks come after the recent US and Israeli strikes on Iran, triggering a wider regional escalation. Iran-linked militias are now threatening Western countries supporting the campaign, warning that their forces and interests across Iraq and the region could become legitimate targets. As drone strikes intensify, northern Iraq is rapidly turning into another front line in the expanding Middle East conflict. Iran has drawn a red line in one of the world's most critical energy choke points. Tehran has reportedly decided to allow only Chinese vessels to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, while warning all other ships they could be attacked. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply flows through this narrow waterway, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. Iran's powerful military arm, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, says it now has complete control over the strait. Officials warn that any vessel attempting to cross without approval risks being struck by missiles or drones in waters between Iran and Oman.
The strait is closed. Anyone who wants to pass will be destroyed by fire by our heroic and devoted forces in the Navy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Army. They will definitely face a serious and decisive encounter if they try to enter this region, and we will also disable their pipelines in the region and will not allow oil to be exported from this region, putting them in a tight spot.
The decision to allow Chinese ships through is widely seen as a reward for Beijing's support during the escalating crisis. China, the largest buyer of Iranian oil, has condemned the recent US-Israel strikes and warned that further escalation could destabilize global energy markets.
The Strait of Hormuz and its surrounding waters are important channels for international cargoes and energy trade. Safeguarding security and stability in this region is in the interest of the international community. China urges all parties to immediately stop military operations, prevent further escalation of tensions, and avoid regional instability that could have a greater impact on the global economy.
Washington has responded sharply to the growing threat in the Gulf. US President Donald Trump says the United States Navy could begin escorting oil tankers through the strait to guarantee the free flow of energy to global markets. If necessary, the United States Navy will begin escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz as soon as possible. No matter what, the United States will ensure the free flow of energy to the world. The Strait of Hormuz remains the world's most important oil transit route, with about 20 million barrels moving through it every day. Analysts warn that if the standoff continues, the region could face a global energy shock and a dangerous naval confrontation in the Gulf. Reports confirm an Iranian Shahed 136 kamikaze drone has struck the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic of Azerbaijan. State media identifies the target as the terminal of Nakhchivan International Airport, where the impact sparked a significant fire. This is the first recorded instance of an Iranian drone exploding on Azerbaijani soil. While authorities assess the structural damage, the incident marks a sharp escalation in regional hostilities. Diplomatic relations between Baku and Tehran face a severe test as Azerbaijan's foreign ministry summons the Iranian ambassador. In a formal note of protest, Baku labels the drone strike a violation of international law that directly threatens regional stability. The ministry maintains that Azerbaijan reserves the right to take appropriate response measures. The strike, which hit near a school and the local airport, has left at least 2 civilians injured. Wreckage from an Iranian drone has been recovered in the village of Shakarabad, where a projectile fell near a local school. This second impact followed an earlier explosion at the Nakhchivan International Airport. Local reports confirm at least 2 civilians sustained injuries in the blasts. This incident follows a series of Iranian strikes targeting the UAE, Kuwait, and Iraq, with Baku acting as a primary corridor for international evacuations from Iran. The strike on this exclave adds a volatile new dimension to the crisis. Military analysts identify the weapon used in the Nakhchivan strike as an Iranian-made Shahed 136 loitering munition. Launched from across the border, the drone traveled a short distance before hitting the airport terminal. The proximity of the Nakhchivan exclave to Iranian territory makes it a high-risk zone for such incursions. Northern Iraq is under fire tonight. Iranian-backed militias, calling themselves the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, have launched a wave of drone and missile attacks targeting American military positions across the region. The group claims it carried out dozens of operations using drones and missiles against what it calls occupation bases in Iraq and the region. The attacks are centered around Erbil, the capital of Iraq's Kurdish region, where the United States maintains a major military presence. Air defense systems intercepted several drones overnight, but falling debris damaged homes and buildings in residential areas. Fear spread quickly among residents as explosions echoed across the city. Drone interceptions scattered debris across neighborhoods in Erbil. Homes were left with shattered windows and walls marked by shrapnel as residents surveyed the damage. Many say they were caught completely off guard.
So I woke up around 2:45 a.m. to one of the loudest bangs I've ever heard of in my life. It was an explosion. And so I quickly jump up and I see like all my windows are broken. And so then I go outside and I just see like a bunch of people, like 20, 30 men, soldiers, who are just, looking for something. I don't know what it is. I think they were looking for the drone.
Another resident described returning home only to discover his house heavily damaged by falling drone fragments. A stark reminder that civilians are now being dragged into the conflict.
Honestly, it is hard feeling. I mean, it is not about the financial aspect of it, but it is about the fact that you go for a journey and come back to see this disaster, that you are being a victim of a catastrophic incident. This war that we have nothing to do with it. We are not responsible for it, we are not a part of it, and we were not the cause of it. We just pay the price for something we didn't do.
The militia group behind the attacks says its fighters have carried out nearly 30 operations in the past 24 hours, launching dozens of drones and missiles at enemy bases. The group also claims it shot down a US MQ-9 drone in Iraq's Salah al-Din province. The attacks come after the recent US and Israeli strikes on Iran, triggering a wider regional escalation. Iran-linked militias are now threatening Western countries supporting the campaign, warning that their forces and interests across Iraq and the region could become legitimate targets. As drone strikes intensify, northern Iraq is rapidly turning into another front line in the expanding Middle East conflict. Europe's nuclear posture has shifted. Emmanuel Macron announced France will increase its nuclear arsenal and allow the temporary deployment of nuclear-armed aircraft to European allies, calling it a response to mounting security threats across the continent.
It is with the utmost seriousness that today I am here to announce to the nation a development that meets our national and European challenges. In the face of a new combination of threats, we must consider our deterrence strategy deep across the European continent in full respect of our sovereignty, with the gradual implementation of what I would call an advanced deterrence.
Macron described the move as forward deterrence, confirming France will expand its warhead numbers for the first time in decades while keeping full presidential control over any nuclear use. He made clear there will be no shared decision-making authority.
I have ordered an increase in the number of nuclear warheads in our arsenal. To put an end to any speculation, we will no longer communicate the figures of our nuclear arsenal. I prefer to say it right away. The ultimate decision is not something to be shared, nor its planning or its implementation.
The announcement comes as European leaders quietly question the long-term reliability of the American nuclear umbrella under President Donald Trump. Germany, under Chancellor Friedrich Merz, has already signaled deeper cooperation with France on deterrence exercises. Moscow responded swiftly. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned that Macron's doctrine risks triggering wider nuclear instability and undermining global non-proliferation norms.
The risk is now growing that the problem of nuclear proliferation will begin to get out of control.
Lavrov argued that expanding nuclear umbrellas could push other nations to seek atomic weapons for protection, calling it a dangerous contradiction in global security policy.
Seemingly paradoxically, the declared noble goal of starting a war in order to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons can stimulate completely opposite trends. Macron stated that Paris intends to use nuclear weapons in order to protect its vital interests. And he added, which are not limited to the borders of France.
France says this is about sovereignty and deterrence strength. Russia calls it escalation. As Paris moves to extend its nuclear reach across Europe, the balance of power on the continent enters a new and uncertain phase. Iran's Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi slammed the US strikes on his country, saying Secretary of State Marco Rubio admitted what we all knew. He called the conflict a war of choice on behalf of Israel, claiming there was never an Iranian threat, and blaming Israel firsters for the bloodshed of both Americans and Iranians.
Mr. Rubio admitted what we all knew. US has entered a war of choice on behalf of Israel. There was never any so-called Iranian threat. Shedding of both American and Iranian blood is thus on Israel firsters. American people deserve better and should take back their country.
Rubio, speaking after a closed-door briefing on Capitol Hill, defended the strikes as preemptive. He said the US acted because Israel's planned attack on Iran would inevitably trigger retaliation against American forces. We knew that would precipitate an attack, and if we didn't act first, we would suffer higher casualties, Rubio said, framing the move as necessary to protect US troops.
Why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic. If we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
President Donald Trump later told reporters the conflict could last 4 to 5 weeks, but possibly far longer, emphasizing the unpredictability of Iranian retaliation. Republican Senator J.D. Vance echoed the administration's stance, warning that U.S. forces would face consequences if the preemptive action had not been taken. The U.S. rationale has drawn criticism in Congress, with Democrats expressing unease over the justification. Lawmakers are preparing to vote on a war powers resolution later this week, a rare test of presidential authority during an active military operation. The Iranian military has issued a high-priority dispatch, Statement Number 7, claiming a significant blow to Western aerial surveillance. According to Tehran, 7 advanced unmanned platforms were neutralized in a single wave of air defense operations. The list includes the US MQ-9 Reaper and Israel's Heron and Hermes drones, hardware that forms the backbone of the coalition's regional intelligence net. This wasn't a localized skirmish. Interceptions were reported across the heart of Iran, from the industrial hubs of Tabriz and Isfahan to the strategic coastal defenses of Bushehr. By targeting drones over the capital, Tehran, and the logistics center of Khorramabad, the Iranian Air Defense Force is signaling that its Iron Shield remains operational, despite days of heavy bombardment under Operation Epic Fury. The numbers are climbing. With this latest wave, Iran's official tally of downed enemy drones has reached 29 since the conflict ignited on February 28th. While the Pentagon has yet to confirm individual high-value losses, military analysts suggest we are witnessing a war of attrition, where tens of millions of dollars in carbon fiber and sensors are meeting Iranian surface-to-air missiles in a high-stakes test of technology versus sheer volume. Journalists on the ground and OSINT analysts are debating the nature of these kills. While Iran displays wreckage of high-end predators, the US has officially deployed Project Lucas for the first time. Swarms of $35,000 expendable drones. The crucial question for the coming days: is Iran successfully blinding the coalition, or is the US intentionally sacrificing cheap Lucas units to map out and deplete Iran's sophisticated Bavar 373 missile batteries? The air war is now bleeding into global economics. Simultaneously, with Statement 7, Iran has intensified its posture near the Strait of Hormuz. With 20% of the world's oil supply at stake, the ability of these drones to provide real-time targeting for the US Navy is critical. If Iran can sustain this level of shoot-downs, the coalition's ability to guarantee safe passage through the world's most vital waterway will be severely compromised. As Operation Epic Fury enters its second week, the narrative is shifting from a laser-focused strike to a grinding endurance match. Between the verified friendly fire loss of 3 US F-15Es over Kuwait and these mounting drone claims, the cost of regime change is being written in wreckage. 29 drones down, whether they are decoys or reapers, marks a turning point in the history of robotic warfare. After surviving relentless waves of Iranian-made Shahed drones, Ukraine may now take that battlefield experience abroad. The United Kingdom plans to involve Ukrainian specialists to help Gulf partners intercept Iranian drones. A country once overwhelmed by these attacks could soon help shoot them down.
We will also involve experts from Ukraine, alongside our own specialists, to help our partners in the Gulf intercept Iranian drones that are attacking them.
The escalation is no longer confined to Eastern Europe. An Iranian-made drone has struck a UK military base in Cyprus, highlighting how Tehran's drone campaign now stretches beyond Ukraine. The battlefield is widening, and British-linked assets are within range. Hours before London confirmed cooperation, Kyiv made its position clear. After facing thousands of Shahed-type drone attacks, Ukraine says its counter-drone experience is now indispensable. President Volodymyr Zelensky offered to share that hard-earned expertise with nations under threat.
The situation in the Middle East shows how difficult it is to provide 100% protection against missiles and shade drones. Even in the Gulf countries, which have more advanced air defense systems than those provided to us so far by our partners, and in greater numbers, not all ballistic missiles are intercepted, in many respects, irreplaceable. We are ready to share this experience and help those nations that helped Ukraine this winter and throughout this war.
Ukrainian forces have developed layered air defenses, electronic warfare systems, and drone interceptors tested under real combat conditions. More than 10 domestic companies now produce counter-drone technologies. Britain appears ready to integrate that frontline knowledge into Gulf defense efforts. This marks a strategic turning point. Iran's drones once deployed against Ukraine via Russia, are now threatening Western-linked interests in the Middle East. Kyiv's transformation from target to counter-drone partner signals a new phase in global drone warfare. Iran has accused Israel of carrying out a false flag drone strike on facilities of Saudi Aramco, claiming the operation was meant to divert attention from Israeli strikes on civilian sites inside Iran.
The attack on Aramco was an Israeli false flag operation, adding that Israel's goal is to distract the minds of regional countries from its crimes in attacking civilian sites in Iran.
The accusation follows a drone attack on an Aramco facility in eastern Saudi Arabia. Sources told Reuters the Ras Tanura refinery was shut down as a precaution, though authorities said the situation remains under control. Tasnim news agency, quoting a military source, said Iran has openly targeted US and Israeli interests in the region, but stressed Aramco facilities have not been among the targets so far, distancing Tehran from the strike.
According to data provided to us by intelligence sources, the port of Fujairah in the UAE is also one of the next targets of the Israelis in the false flag operation, and this regime intends to attack it.
The same source claimed intelligence suggests the port of Fujairah in the UAE could be the next target in what Iran alleges is an ongoing Israeli false flag operation. The incident raises concerns over the vulnerability of critical oil infrastructure, with the attack signaling potential disruption to global energy supplies amid rising regional tensions. The conflict has widened again. Australia's Defence Minister says Iranian drones struck Al Minhad Air Base in the United Arab Emirates on the first night of the fighting. The facility is a key logistics hub for Australian operations in the Middle East. As of now, officials say there were no injuries.
On the first night, there was a strike at the Al Minhad Air Base, but all the Australians who are there are safe and accounted for. There were no injuries to Australians, and we've got more than 100 personnel actually across the Middle East. Most of them are in the UAE, where we've had an operational headquarters at Al Minhad for many, many years now, but they are all safe and accounted for.
Canberra says more than 100 personnel are deployed across the region, most based in the UAE. Authorities are reviewing contingency plans as airspace restrictions continue to complicate evacuation options for the estimated 115,000 Australians across the Middle East.
We're working through contingencies, but I really don't want to speculate on them because it clearly is a function of what plays out, and you know that is very uncertain. But you know we have all the scenarios in mind, and we are preparing as best we can for them. But I'd also make the point: there's 115,000 Australians across the region. That the most significant limitation on being able to do anything is the restriction of airspace. And when airspace begins to open up, our expectation is that the quickest flights that will resume will be commercial options. So,
the US Embassy in Riyadh has been struck by 2 drones, igniting a limited fire and causing minor structural damage inside the diplomatic compound. Saudi officials say emergency teams responded quickly and no casualties were reported. The attack marks a serious escalation as the regional conflict widens.
Official spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense Major General Turki al-Maliki announced that the United States Embassy in Riyadh was targeted by 2 drones, according to initial assessments, resulting in a limited fire and minor material damage to the building.
The strike comes amid expanding Iranian retaliation following US and Israeli air raids that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. In recent days, American diplomatic missions in Kuwait and Jordan have also faced threats, while protests erupted near the US Embassy in Baghdad. What began as targeted military action is now rippling across the Gulf. Air raid sirens have sounded in Bahrain, Israeli forces have struck Beirut, and Hezbollah claims drone launches toward Israeli bases. Critical oil infrastructure, including Saudi facilities, remains on high alert. Washington has urged Americans to leave large parts of the Middle East, warning of serious security risks as the confrontation deepens. President Donald Trump has vowed retaliation after the embassy strike and the deaths of 6 US service members. Pressed on what that response would look like, he delivered a blunt warning. Trump has indicated operations could last several weeks and suggested ground options are no longer off the table.
You'll soon find out.
An attack on a US embassy is viewed as a direct strike on American sovereign territory, raising the stakes dramatically. With no visible diplomatic off-ramp and both sides signaling further action, the risk of a prolonged regional war is growing. The question now is not whether there will be retaliation, but how far it will go. The US Embassy in Riyadh has been struck by 2 drones, igniting a limited fire and causing minor structural damage inside the diplomatic compound. Saudi officials say emergency teams responded quickly and no casualties were reported. The attack marks a serious escalation as the regional conflict widens.
Official spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense, Major General Turki al-Maliki, announced that the United States Embassy in Riyadh was targeted by 2 drones, according to initial assessments, resulting in a limited fire and minor material damage to the building.
The strike comes amid expanding Iranian retaliation following US and Israeli air raids that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. In recent days, American diplomatic missions in Kuwait and Jordan have also faced threats, while protests erupted near the US Embassy in Baghdad. What began as targeted military action is now rippling across the Gulf. Air raid sirens have sounded in Bahrain, Israeli forces have struck Beirut, and Hezbollah claims drone launches toward Israeli bases. Critical oil infrastructure, including Saudi facilities, remains on high alert. Washington has urged Americans to leave large parts of the Middle East, warning of serious security risks as the confrontation deepens. President Donald Trump has vowed retaliation after the embassy strike and the deaths of 6 US service members. Pressed on what that response would look like, he delivered a blunt warning. Trump has indicated operations could last several weeks and suggested ground options are no longer off the table.
You'll soon find out.
An attack on a US embassy is viewed as a direct strike on American sovereign territory, raising the stakes dramatically. With no visible diplomatic off-ramp and both sides signaling further action, the risk of a prolonged regional war is growing. The question now is not whether there will be retaliation, but how far it will go. The Middle East is on the brink of a maritime showdown. Iran's powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has declared the Strait of Hormuz closed and issued its most explicit threat yet to global shipping. In remarks carried by state media, a senior advisor to the Guard's commander-in-chief warned that any vessel attempting to cross would face direct attack.
It has reached $81, and the world is certainly waiting for it to reach at least $200. They were looting and taking out 20 million barrels of oil daily from this region. A portion of it was sold, and small amounts returned to these countries. The strait is closed. Anyone who wants to pass will be destroyed by fire by our heroic and devoted forces in the Navy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Army. They will definitely face a serious and decisive encounter if they try to enter this region, and we will also disable their pipelines in the region and will not allow oil to be exported from this region, putting them in a tight spot. American owe thousands of billions of dollars. They are thirsty for the region's oil. We don't let a drip of oil be reached to you.
The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most vital oil corridor, carrying nearly 1/5 of global daily consumption. A disruption here would choke energy supplies, send crude prices sharply higher, and rattle already fragile markets. But there is immediate contradiction. While Iran claims closure, the United States says shipping continues. This escalation follows reported US-Israeli strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, an event that dramatically intensified regional tensions. US President Donald Trump has publicly encouraged Iranians to remove the ruling clerics, a move Tehran views as open regime pressure. In response, Iran has launched missile barrages toward Gulf states hosting US forces, expanding the confrontation beyond rhetoric and into direct regional retaliation. If Tehran attempts to physically enforce a blockade, it risks direct naval confrontation with US forces operating in the Gulf. Under freedom of navigation doctrine, Washington cannot allow a sustained shutdown of the world's most critical oil artery. 20% of global oil flows through this narrow passage. The next vessel that approaches Hormuz may determine whether this remains strategic signaling or becomes a wider maritime conflict. Russia has issued a chilling warning over the escalating US war against Iran. Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, says the conflict risks spiraling into a global catastrophe. In a sharp attack on US President Donald Trump, Medvedev warned that Washington's actions could push the world towards a third world war if the current course continues. Formally, no. But if Trump continues his insane course of criminal regime change, it will undoubtedly begin. And any event could be the trigger. Anything. Medvedev also framed the confrontation as a wider geopolitical struggle, accusing the United States and its allies of waging a war to preserve their global dominance. The former Russian president also warned that Washington's decision to strike Iran could ignite anger across the Shia world and push Tehran toward nuclear weapons development. This is a war between the US and its allies to maintain global dominance. The pigs don't want to leave the trough. Trump made a grave mistake. With his decision, he put all Americans at risk, even though the Iranian regime is unpopular in neighboring Arab countries. The main point is that the late Ayatollah was a spiritual father to nearly 300 million Shiites. And now, he's a martyr. You can imagine the rest for yourself. And now, there's no doubt that Iran will redouble its efforts to develop nuclear weapons. Medvedev then issued his most dramatic warning yet about the consequences of a nuclear confrontation between major powers. There are no magic cures for the actions of complete idiots and complete bastards, and there never will be. There's only one guarantee. The US fears Russia and knows the price of a nuclear conflict. If it breaks out, Hiroshima and Nagasaki will be like child's play in a sandbox. Despite the warnings from Moscow, President Donald Trump has defended the ongoing military campaign against Iran, saying the United States is determined to eliminate what he calls the threats posed by Tehran.
And I said that from the beginning. They're never going to have a nuclear weapon. They were on the road to getting one legitimately through a deal that was signed foolishly by our country. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders. And we thought we had a deal, but then they backed out. And they came back, and we thought we had a deal, and they backed out. I said, you can't deal with these people. You got to do it the right way.
Medvedev's warning comes as the war between the United States and Iran continues to intensify across the Middle East. While Washington insists the campaign is aimed at crippling Iran's military capabilities and preventing it from acquiring nuclear weapons, Moscow is warning that further escalation could push the conflict far beyond the region. With both sides hardening their positions, fears are now growing that the crisis could spiral into a wider global confrontation. Iran's Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi held urgent calls with China's Wang Yi and Russia's Sergei Lavrov as Tehran responds to what it calls a US-Israel war launched amid ongoing negotiations. The outreach signals rising fears of a broader geopolitical escalation. According to China's foreign ministry, Araghchi assured Beijing that Iran would do its utmost to protect Chinese citizens and institutions. He accused Washington of launching war during ongoing negotiations, despite positive progress in recent talks mediated by Oman. Just hours before the strikes, Oman's foreign minister, Badr al-Busaidi, had said a peace deal was within reach.
China values the traditional friendship between China and Iran and supports Iran in safeguarding its sovereignty, security, territorial integrity, and national dignity, and in upholding its legitimate and lawful rights and interests.
Wang Yi reaffirmed China's support for Iran's sovereignty and called on the US and Israel to immediately halt military operations. Beijing's stakes are significant. Over 80% of Iran's oil exports go to China, with both nations tied by a 25-year strategic pact and cooperation through BRICS Plus and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In his call with Russia, Araghchi alleged that a missile strike on a school in Manab killed at least 51 schoolgirls, calling it a crime against international peace. He urged urgent UN Security Council action while reiterating Iran's right to defend itself. Sergei Lavrov condemned the attacks and backed calls for a UN session. With Iran launching retaliatory strikes and tensions spilling across the Gulf, the conflict now risks expanding into a wider regional and potentially global crisis. Day 3 of the war, and a troubling question is emerging in Washington. Is the United States burning through its most expensive missiles faster than it can replace them. US forces have intercepted hundreds of Iranian ballistic missiles and drones targeting American bases and allies across the Middle East. The US military is relying on advanced air defense systems like Patriot, THAAD, and ship-based interceptors to stop those attacks. But every interception uses costly high-tech missiles, and experts warn that a prolonged conflict could begin to strain American interceptor stockpiles.
I think it is, I'll grant the administration this, it is way too early, 48 hours in, for cost estimates. Clearly, when you combine the efforts of the amount of munitions that we have spent over the last year attacking the Houthis, the amount of munitions that's been spent on other ventures, I think the 7 different military conflicts the president has put America into, our munitions are low. That's public knowledge. It will require additional funding. Funding where we have other domestic needs as well.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio has also acknowledged the scale of Iran's missile buildup, warning that Tehran's production capacity far exceeds the rate at which US interceptors can be manufactured.
They are producing, by some estimates, over 100 of these missiles a month. Compare that to the 6 or 7 interceptors that can be built a month.
Analysts estimate Iran may have entered the war with roughly 2,500 ballistic missiles, meaning the battle is becoming a race between Iran launching missiles and the US, and Israel destroying launchers and storage sites before they can be fired. At the same time, the United States is also expending offensive weapons. US Navy destroyers have launched Tomahawk cruise missiles against Iranian targets, weapons that are also considered critical for any future conflict with China. For now, US officials say defenses are holding and the operation is progressing. But if the war drags on, the fight may test not just military power, but also how long America's missile arsenal can sustain the battle. The war in West Asia has crossed a dangerous threshold with a drone strike hitting the British airbase at RAF Akrotiri and damage reported at a French naval facility in Abu Dhabi. 2 NATO powers have now felt the conflict's reach as Iran expands missile and drone attacks across the region.
Well, we don't know the full details of this particular drone incident on Cyprus or the timings of it either, so I don't want to speculate specifically on that one. What I would say is we're already seeing our partners in the Gulf and locations where we have large numbers of British citizens and holidaymakers, tourists who are in the region, and they are facing now. Over the weekend, they've seen Iranians, we've seen hundreds of ballistic missiles and thousands of drones fired from Iran on those countries, and that's why this is significant.
Britain has strengthened its military posture in the Gulf, placing assets on high readiness as strikes widen beyond military targets. London agreed to a limited US request to use British bases for defensive operations aimed at intercepting missiles threatening Gulf partners and British nationals.
The concern now, of course, is that this regime is lashing out. It's lashing out in an increasingly indiscriminate and widespread way. And people will be really concerned that it's not just military targets, but civilian airports like Kuwait, hotels in Dubai and Bahrain are being hit. And so that's why we've strengthened the UK defences in the region.
In Berlin, Chancellor Friedrich Merz acknowledged the risks of escalation, but made clear that Germany shares the strategic goals of Washington and Israel. Europe, he signaled, will not distance itself from its allies, despite legal and diplomatic complexities.
Condemning Iran's violations of the law and even imposing extensive packages of sanctions have had little effect over the years and decades. This is also because we were not prepared to enforce fundamental interests with military force if necessary. Therefore, now is not the time to lecture our partners and allies. Despite all our doubts, we share many of their goals without being able to actually achieve them ourselves.
France confirmed a hangar at its naval base in the Emirates was struck, prompting a reinforced defensive posture. Paris says it stands ready to support regional partners under collective self-defense principles while also urging urgent de-escalation and diplomacy.
Yesterday, a hangar at our naval base in the Emirates was hit in a drone attack that targeted the port of Abu Dhabi, fortunately causing only limited material damage. France expresses its full support and complete solidarity. It stands ready, in accordance with the agreements binding it to its partners and the principles of collective self-defense provided for under international law, to participate in their defense.
Meanwhile, global powers are taking sides. Russia and China have condemned the strikes on Iran as violations of international law and called for an immediate end to military action, emphasizing diplomacy over escalation, while North Korea denounced US and Israeli operations as unlawful aggression. The alignment is hardening. The US, UK, France, and Germany coordinate defensive measures as Iran receives diplomatic backing from Russia, China, and North Korea. Article 5 has not been invoked, yet but West Asia is now testing the limits of alliance solidarity, and the next strike could redefine this conflict overnight. China strongly condemned the US-Israel strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, calling them a serious violation of sovereignty and urging an immediate halt to military operations to prevent further regional escalation.
On China's reaction to military strikes launched by US and Israel on Iran, Mandarin. The attack and assassination of Iran's supreme leader was a serious violation of Iran's sovereignty and security, and a trampling of the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and the basic norms of international relations. China firmly opposes and strongly condemns this action. We urge an immediate cessation of military operations, avoid further escalation of tensions, and jointly safeguard peace and stability in the Middle East and the world.
Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning highlighted risks to Gulf states and global stability, rejecting claims linking China to supplying Iran with CM-302 missiles and urging all parties to reduce tensions through diplomacy.
On reports, China and Iran are close to reaching agreement on purchase of CM-302 supersonic anti-ship missiles. If delivered, these would be among most advanced weapons China has supplied Iran, Mandarin. The report is untrue. As a responsible major country, China has always fulfilled its international obligations. China opposes malicious hype and hopes that relevant parties will do more to ease tensions.
Iran retaliated with widespread missile and drone strikes on Israel, while US bases in UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, and Kuwait were reportedly targeted. Beijing also stressed the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz, warning that disruptions could threaten global trade and energy security. Over 555 fatalities and 131 affected Iranian cities have been reported. China evacuated More than 3,000 citizens condemned the death of a Chinese national and provided consular assistance, reflecting both humanitarian concerns and geopolitical stakes. As US-Israel strikes reshape the Middle East battlefield, a dramatic warning from Washington is raising fears of wider escalation. Senior Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has named the next country he believes could fall under President Donald Trump's foreign policy doctrine.
President Trump finished the job that President Reagan failed to do. I am a big admirer of Ronald Reagan, but I'm here to tell you that Donald Trump, in my opinion, is the gold standard for Republicans, maybe any president, when it comes to foreign policy.
Framing Trump as a results-driven leader, Graham pointed to the capture of Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro as proof that action, not debate, defines this administration. Then came the four words now echoing across geopolitical circles.
Maduro, everybody talked about him? Well, Donald Trump's got him in jail. Cuba's next.
That declaration sent shockwaves through the Caribbean. Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida, was not merely mentioned. It was marked as the next regime Graham believes will collapse.
They're gonna fall. This communist dictatorship in Cuba, their days are numbered.
Graham linked that warning directly to the unfolding crisis in Iran, arguing that Tehran's leadership has already been dismantled. His language signaled not containment, but what critics call sequential confrontation.
The Iranian regime, the mothership of international terrorism, is about to collapse. The captain of the ship, the Ayatollah, is stone-cold dead.
Israel's air defense shield is facing its most intense stress test, yet after Iran unleashed waves of ballistic missiles and drones in retaliation for Israeli strikes. Sirens sounded across Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as interceptors fired in rapid succession, but several projectiles broke through. One woman was killed, and at least 20 people were wounded, exposing cracks in the system built around the Iron Dome. Military analysts say Iran's strategy is simple but devastating: overwhelm the shield through saturation. By launching hundreds of missiles alongside decoys and drones, Tehran forced Israel to activate multiple layers, including David's Sling, Arrow 3, and the US-made THAAD. Even with a high interception rate, sheer volume ensured that some warheads slipped through. This is also a war of economics, where every interceptor launched drains resources at a staggering pace. Israeli defense missiles cost tens of thousands of dollars each, while many of Iran's drones and ballistic projectiles are far cheaper to produce and deploy. The use of advanced systems like the Fatah-1 adds further strain, demanding faster detection and more expensive responses. Despite Israeli strikes reportedly destroying significant Iranian launch capacity, Tehran has proven it can still mount large-scale barrages. The latest exchanges underline a harsh reality. No layered defense is invincible when faced with saturation, decoys, and hypersonic maneuvering threats. The message resonating far beyond the region is clear. Modern missile warfare is not just about protection, but about who can endure the cost longer. The Iran war has pushed the global oil market from fear to full disruption, with the Strait of Hormuz now under direct threat. Nearly 20 million barrels a day move through this narrow corridor, and more than 200 tankers are already stalled outside it. Brent crude has surged toward $82, and the countdown to 100 has begun. Asia takes the first hit because over 80% of Hormuz oil flows east toward energy-hungry giants like India and China. Every dollar rise in crude widens trade deficits, weakens currencies, and fuels inflation that lands directly on households. Gasoline futures are already spiking, turning a distant war into a kitchen table crisis. Beyond the price spike lies a deeper danger: logistics paralysis driven by fear and insurance collapse. War risk premiums in the Gulf have jumped sharply, and without coverage, tankers cannot legally sail, even if ports remain open. Aviation, shipping, and supply chains are now bracing for emergency fuel surcharges and disrupted trade routes. Europe enters this crisis with low gas storage and limited room for error, while emerging economies face a brutal stagflation trap. Higher energy costs threaten to reignite inflation just as central banks were trying to stabilize growth. What began as a regional military escalation is now morphing into a global economic squeeze. While importers scramble, some producers may quietly gain from the chaos as buyers pivot to alternative suppliers. Higher oil benchmarks mean stronger revenues for countries positioned outside the choke point. But if Hormuz remains unstable, this will not just be an oil rally, it will be a worldwide inflation shock. Russian President Vladimir Putin held a phone call with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed, discussing the escalating Middle East crisis following the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Both leaders stressed the need to cease hostilities and return to diplomacy, with Putin offering to relay UAE concerns to Tehran and praising Emirati efforts to protect Russian nationals and tourists amid the crisis. Shortly after, Iran launched a massive retaliatory attack on the UAE. Radar systems detected 541 drones, with 506 destroyed and 35 landing inside the country. The barrage also included 165 ballistic missiles, of which 152 were intercepted mid-air and 13 fell harmlessly into the sea. 2 cruise missiles were also completely neutralized. Despite the strong defense, UAE officials reported that the strikes caused damage and endangered civilians, emphasizing that the country had no role in hostilities against Iran, making the attacks unjustified and alarming. Authorities highlighted the effectiveness of UAE's air defense systems, describing the near-total interception of drones and missiles as a clear demonstration of preparedness against regional threats. The assault shows a dangerous broadening of Middle East conflict, where even neutral states like the UAE are being drawn into the escalation triggered by the US-Israel strike on Iran. While the UAE successfully thwarted most attacks, the scale of the offensive underlines the fragile security situation and the urgent need for diplomacy to prevent further regional chaos. Israel has activated its laser-based Iron Beam for the first time in combat, intercepting rockets from Hezbollah amid an expanding regional war. The move comes as missile barrages from Iran and Lebanon test Israel's air defenses beyond routine skirmishes. Officials call it historic, but the timing raises questions. For years, Israel relied on the Iron Dome to shield its cities, backed by higher-tier systems designed for larger threats. But saturation attacks and cheaper drones have exposed the cost imbalance, where expensive interceptors face low-cost projectiles. Iron Beam promises near zero cost per shot, changing the economics of defense under pressure. Developed by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, the 100-kilowatt laser fires at the speed of light and can engage rockets, mortars, and UAVs within seconds. Its deployment during active hostilities suggests Israel is accelerating new tools into real war conditions. Critics say such urgency reflects the strain of sustained multi-front confrontation. As Hezbollah intensifies fire from Lebanon and Iran expands its missile footprint, Israel's battlefield is evolving into a contest of endurance and adaptation. Iron Beam may represent technological advancement, but it also signals that traditional defenses are being tested like never before. In this war of attrition, innovation itself reveals where the pressure lies. A fierce information war is unfolding alongside military escalation, after Iran claimed it struck the USS Abraham Lincoln with 4 cruise missiles, forcing it to retreat. The assertion, broadcast on state television, signaled a dramatic attempt to project strength against one of America's most powerful naval assets. Iranian military spokesperson Ibrahim Zolfagari said the strikes were part of a wider campaign targeting U.S. infrastructure across the Gulf. He claimed bases in Kuwait were completely out of action, while a naval facility in Bahrain suffered severe drone damage, indicating a coordinated regional offensive.
The USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier of the U.S. military was attacked with 4 cruise missiles. After the attack, the U.S. aircraft carrier fled its mission location to the Southeast Indian Ocean. The U.S. naval base at Al Salem in Kuwait was completely out of action following the recent attacks, and 3 U.S. naval infrastructure facilities at Mohammed Al Ahmad in Kuwait were also destroyed. The U.S. naval base at Salman Port in Bahrain was hit by 4 drones, causing severe damage to its command and support centers.
The statement expanded further, alleging missile strikes on U.S. and British oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, with vessels reportedly set ablaze. Iran also claimed repeated attacks on U.S. bases across Gulf countries and Iraq's Kurdistan region, alongside a staggering figure of 560 American casualties. The United States swiftly rejected the claims. The U.S. Central Command said the aircraft carrier was not hit and remains fully operational, adding that Iranian missiles didn't even come close. However, it confirmed limited casualties, with 3 personnel killed and 5 injured.
Iran's IRGC claims to have struck USS Abraham Lincoln with ballistic missiles. Lie. The Lincoln was not hit. The missiles launched didn't even come close. The Lincoln continues to launch aircraft in support of CENTCOM's relentless campaign to defend the American people by eliminating threats from the Iranian regime.
As U.S.-Israel strikes on Iran trigger retaliation, the conflict is rapidly widening, both on the battlefield and in narrative. With competing claims and rising attacks across the region, the crisis is entering a volatile phase where perception and power are colliding. Iran has thrown down a strategic marker. Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi declares that mosaic defense is active and shaping the battlefield. He says Tehran has studied 2 decades of U.S. military campaigns to its east and west and adapted. The message is direct: strikes on the capital will not cripple command. Iran claims its decentralized war design is already influencing pressure on US bases. This is not just rhetoric, it is a public unveiling of wartime architecture.
We've had 2 decades to study defeats of the US military to our immediate east and west. We've incorporated lessons accordingly.
IRGC's words are calculated and precise. Bombings in our capital have no impact on our ability to conduct war. That line signals resilience. He frames mosaic defense as the mechanism that allows Iran to determine when and how conflict ends. It is a doctrine built on dispersion, autonomy, and layered command. The implication: no single strike can paralyze the system.
Bombings in our capital have no impact on our ability to conduct war. Decentralized mosaic defense enables us to decide when and how war will end.
So what is mosaic defense? It fractures military power into semi-autonomous units, each a tile in a national grid. Missile, drone, and ground assets are distributed, redundant, and empowered to act within strategic guidance. Decentralization is hardwired, reducing vulnerability to decapitation-style campaigns. This marks an evolution from older centralized models and proxy-heavy forward defense. Instead of relying on hierarchy, Tehran is embedding endurance into structure. The battlefield becomes networked rather than concentrated. By confirming mosaic defense publicly, Iran signals confidence in a prolonged, attritional posture. The doctrine reframes deterrence, not by preventing strikes, but by absorbing them and continuing operations. The strategic message is unmistakable. Endurance is now institutionalized. The fragile calm along Israel's northern border has collapsed. Hezbollah launched rockets and drones toward Haifa, declaring the strike retaliation for the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. A second front in this widening war is now active.
The resistance leadership has always affirmed that the continuation of Israeli aggression and the assassination of our leaders, youth and people, gives us the right to defend ourselves and respond at the appropriate time and place.
Hezbollah says the attack was carried out in defense of Lebanon and in response to repeated Israeli aggression. By targeting a site near Haifa, the group signaled it is prepared to escalate beyond border skirmishes. The message is clear: Khamenei's killing will not go unanswered.
The Israeli enemy cannot continue its 15-month-long aggression without a warning response to halt this aggression and withdraw from the occupied Lebanese territories.
The exchange formally widens a conflict already engulfing Iran and drawing in the United States. Hezbollah, long backed by Tehran, has now moved from deterrence to direct retaliation. Israel has blamed the group for the escalation, raising the risk of swift counterstrikes. Yet Hezbollah enters this confrontation weakened after heavy losses in the 2024 war. Whether it can sustain prolonged strikes remains uncertain. But with missiles now raining over northern Israel, the regional balance has shifted dramatically. A Shahed-type drone has struck inside the UK's RAF Akrotiri Air Base in Cyprus, causing what Cypriot authorities describe as minor material damage. President Nikos Christodoulides says the drone hit shortly after midnight, with no immediate reports of casualties as officials place security services on alert. British Defence Secretary John Healey says UK defences across the region have been strengthened, warning Iran is lashing out in an increasingly indiscriminate and widespread way, with concerns expanding beyond military sites to civilian infrastructure.
The concern now, of course, is that this regime is lashing out. It's lashing out in an increasingly indiscriminate and widespread way. And people will be really concerned that it's not just military targets, but civilian airports like Kuwait, hotels in Dubai and Bahrain are being hit. And so that's why we've strengthened the UK defences in the region.
Iran's retaliation has edged dangerously close to British forces, with 2 missiles fired in the direction of Cyprus, home to key UK military bases, including RAF Akrotiri. While officials say the missiles were not believed to be directly targeted at British facilities, their proximity has triggered alarm in London.
We are pretty sure they weren't targeted at our bases, but it shows how indiscriminate the Iranian retaliation is. 300 UK military personnel were close to the targets in Bahrain. Some of them were in several hundred yards of the missile strikes.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer moved swiftly to draw a clear line, insisting Britain played no role in the US-Israeli strikes on Iran, while confirming UK aircraft are now flying defensive missions across the region. London says its priority is protection, not escalation, even as tensions spiral.
The United Kingdom played no role in these strikes, but we have long been clear the regime in Iran is utterly abhorrent. Our forces are active, and British planes are in the sky today as part of coordinated regional defensive operations to protect our people, our interests, and our allies, as Britain has done before, in line with international law. We've stepped up protections for British bases and personnel to their highest level.
The escalation follows waves of US and Israeli strikes that reportedly eliminated senior Iranian leadership, including Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Iran has responded with missile and drone attacks across the Middle East, closing airspace in multiple countries and raising fears of a wider regional war. British officials warn further retaliation cannot be ruled out, as energy markets and global security hang in the balance.
Iran just stated that they are going to hit very hard today, harder than they have ever hit before. They better not do that, however, because if they do, we will hit them with a force that has never been seen before. Thank you for your attention to this matter. President Donald J. Trump.
The rhetoric signals maximum deterrence and maximum risk, as the crisis edges closer to a broader confrontation. China strongly condemned the US-Israel strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, calling them a serious violation of sovereignty and urging an immediate halt to military operations to prevent further regional escalation.
On China's reaction to military strikes launched by US and Israel on Iran, Mandarin. The attack and assassination of Iran's supreme leader was a serious violation of Iran's sovereignty and security, and a trampling of the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and the basic norms of international relations. China firmly opposes and strongly condemns this action. We urge an immediate cessation of military operations, avoid further escalation of tensions, and jointly safeguard peace and stability in the Middle East and the world.
Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning highlighted risks to Gulf states and global stability, rejecting claims linking China to supplying Iran with CM-302 missiles and urging all parties to reduce tensions through diplomacy.
On reports, China and Iran are close to reaching agreement on purchase of CM-302 supersonic anti-ship missiles. If delivered, these would be among most advanced weapons China has supplied Iran, Mandarin. The report is untrue. As a responsible major country, China has always fulfilled its international obligations. China opposes malicious hype and hopes that relevant parties will do more to ease tensions.
Iran retaliated with widespread missile and drone strikes on Israel, while US bases in UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, and Kuwait were reportedly targeted. Beijing also stressed the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz, warning that disruptions could threaten global trade and energy security. Over 555 fatalities and 131 affected Iranian cities have been reported. China evacuated more than 3,000 citizens, condemned the death of a Chinese national, and provided consular assistance, reflecting both humanitarian concerns and geopolitical stakes. Iran's retaliation is expanding across the Middle East. Iran-backed militias in Iraq have launched drone and rocket attacks targeting US bases in Erbil, sending projectiles streaking across the skies near the airport. Explosions were reported as air defense systems near the American base fired interceptors. The attacks come just hours after the United States and Israel launched massive strikes across Iran that reportedly killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, the 10th wave of Operation True Promise. 4 began with the illumination of Kyber missiles, opening massive gates of fire toward the occupied territories. A targeted attack on the government complex of the Zionist regime in Tel Aviv, attacks on military and security centers in Haifa, and an attack on East Jerusalem were among the objectives of the 10th wave. Previously, we had warned about the expansion of attacks on bases and the occupied territories of the aggressive enemy, and had already announced this. The sound of sirens in Israel will never stop. Now we advise the residents of the occupied territories to stay away from the vicinity of military bases, security centers, and government facilities, and to immediately leave the occupied territories. The occupied territories that Netanyahu's government has forced you to live in have now become places of death and destruction.
The umbrella militia network, calling itself the Islamic Resistance, claimed responsibility. The group says The attacks are revenge for US and Israeli strikes on Iranian territory. Exploding drones and rockets were launched at American installations in northern Iraq. There were no immediate reports of casualties from the Erbil attack. But the retaliation is not limited to Iraq. Iran has also fired missiles toward Israel, with blasts reported in Jerusalem and central Israel. Emergency crews rushed to the scene after shrapnel damaged vehicles and injured civilians. The strikes mark one of the most direct Iranian attacks on Israeli territory in the latest escalation.
Over the past 36 hours, the United States and its partners have launched Operation Epic Fury, one of the largest, most complex, most overwhelming military offensives the world has ever seen. Nobody's seen anything like it. We have hit hundreds of targets in Iran, including Revolutionary Guard facilities, Iranian air defense systems. Just now it was announced that we knocked out 9 ships plus their naval building, all in a matter of literally minutes. Iran's formerly supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is dead. This wretched and vile man had the blood of hundreds and even thousands of Americans on his hands and was responsible for the slaughter of countless thousands of innocent people all across many countries. Last night, all over Iran, the voices of the Iranian people could be heard cheering and celebrating in the streets when his death was announced. The entire military command is gone as well, and many of them want to surrender into saving their lives. They want immunity. They're calling by the thousands. Combat operations continue at this time in full force, and they will continue until all of our objectives are achieved. We have very strong objectives. They could have done something 2 weeks ago, but they just couldn't get there.
As the conflict intensifies, Iran's political leadership is unleashing fierce rhetoric against Washington. Senior Iranian figure Ali Larijani has accused US President Donald Trump of plunging the region into chaos and sacrificing American soldiers for Israel's ambitions.
Trump plunged the region into chaos with his delusional fantasies and now fears more American troop casualties. With his delusional actions, he turned his self-made America First slogan into Israel First and sacrificed American soldiers for Israel's power-hungry ambitions. And with new fabrications, it is once again imposing the cost of assassinating its own character on American soldiers and families. Today, the Iranian nation is defending itself. The armed forces of Iran did not initiate the aggression. We will not negotiate with the United States.
Meanwhile, Washington says the war is already claiming lives. The US military has confirmed the deaths of 3 American service members during the escalating conflict. Iran has vowed revenge and launched missile attacks toward Israel and US positions in the region, with rockets, drones, and missiles now flying across multiple fronts. The Middle East is sliding closer to a wider regional war. A new phase in the conflict has emerged after Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, issued a sharply worded statement claiming its latest missile operations had opened huge doors of fire toward Israeli territory. The unusually dramatic language signaled not just escalation, but an intent to project scale and intensity beyond routine military messaging.
The 10th wave of Operation Promise of Truth opened huge doors of fire to the occupied territories with the Kyber missile maneuvers, a targeted attack on the Zionist regime's government campus in Tel Aviv, an attack on military and security centers in Haifa, and an attack on East Jerusalem were some of the goals of the 10th wave.
Kyber missile maneuvers mark 10th wave. In announcement number 9 of what it calls Operation Promise of Truth the IRGC said the 10th wave of strikes was executed using Kyber missile maneuvers. The terminology suggests a sustained and evolving campaign rather than a single retaliatory action, reinforcing Tehran's narrative of continuity and expanding operations. According to the statement, strikes were directed at a government campus in Tel Aviv, alongside military and security sites in Haifa and Jerusalem. By naming key urban and strategic centers, the IRGC indicated a broader operational footprint, moving beyond symbolic or isolated targets to a multi-city pressure strategy. In a striking move, the IRGC urged civilians to avoid military and government sites and to leave the occupied territories immediately. It also claimed air raid sirens in Israel would never stop, pointing to a strategy aimed at sustained psychological pressure as much as physical impact. Iran claims a dramatic escalation under Operation True Promise 4. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says its forces have struck multiple American and Israeli targets across the region in a sweeping wave of attacks. According to the IRGC, naval drones hit the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln after it approached close to Iran's maritime borders in the Gulf of Oman. Tehran further claims the carrier strike group retreated rapidly from the area following the strike. The claims mark one of the most explosive developments in the widening regional confrontation, though independent confirmation of the attack has not yet emerged.
In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. In the past few days, the Islamic Republic of Iran's armed forces have carried out numerous operations. The Islamic Republic of Iran's air and naval forces have targeted the Ramad David Air Base and the Muran radar site in the occupied territory. In addition, the location of the American terrorists in the Odairi camp in Kuwait was not the target of the Iranian Navy's attack air bases.
Iran also claims its newly deployed air defense system successfully targeted a U.S. F-15E Strike Eagle fighter jet. According to the IRGC statement, the American strike aircraft crashed near Iran's southwestern borders after being intercepted by Iranian defenses. The F-15E is one of the United States' most advanced two-seat strike fighters, widely used in precision combat operations. Tehran's claim, if confirmed, would represent a significant moment in the escalating military confrontation between Iran and U.S. forces operating in the region.
The aircraft carrier of Abraham Lincoln, which was close to the Iranian waters at a distance of 340 kilometers from the Iranian waters, was targeted by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard's Air Force. It left the area along with its aircraft carriers and is now more than 1,000 kilometers away from the area. In addition to their own operations, the operations of the armed forces continue.
Tehran says the aerial battle did not end there. Iranian forces claim they also shot down a highly advanced Israeli Hermes 900 drone over the skies of Khorramabad. The drone, valued at roughly $30 million, is among Israel's most sophisticated long-range surveillance and strike platforms. Iran says the aircraft was intercepted by its air defense network, adding another layer to the sweeping claims emerging from Operation True Promise 4.
Some of the aircraft carriers of the Army and the IRGC, including the Commander-in-Chief of the aircraft carrier of Qatam Olambia, Salavatol Lalak, Sopi Emruz, 5th of May, 14th of November, a F-15E fighter, and a total of 4 aircraft carriers of the advanced Hermes 900 and MQ-9 have been destroyed in the skies of the western regions, south of the west and south of our country.
At the same time, the IRGC says it launched heavy Khorramshahr 4 ballistic missiles, carrying 1-ton warheads toward Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion Airport, and the Israeli Air Force's 27th Squadron base. According to Iranian officials, the strikes were part of the 19th wave of the operation.
The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Air Force, in the course of the 19th operation of Sadek 4, fired ballistic missiles at the Ben Gurion landing site with the name of Ya Hassan bin Ali.
Iran claims these missiles were preceded by attacking drones and successfully penetrated multiple layers of Israeli air defenses, creating what it described as a devastating impact on strategic targets inside Israeli territory.
In total, more than 2,000 Papad missiles and more than 600 missiles have been fired against American positions in the region and Zionist targets in the occupied territories.
Tehran further claims that earlier phases of Operation True Promise 4 struck 20 American military targets across Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. Iranian officials say the coordinated strikes across multiple fronts have altered the military equation of the war, though these sweeping battlefield claims remain unverified by the United States or Israel.
More attacks against our country's enemies continue. The constant sound of shelling and the long-term imprisonment of the population in the occupied territories in the shelters in the last 100 hours of the war shows the steadfast and well-managed spirit of the Iranian regime for the hard revenge of the terrorist criminals.
The diplomatic confrontation between Iran and the United States has intensified amid the widening Middle East conflict. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has accused US President Donald Trump of betraying diplomacy and abandoning nuclear negotiations in favor of military escalation alongside Israel.
When complex nuclear negotiations are treated like a real estate transaction, and when big lies cloud realities, unrealistic expectations can never be met. The outcome? Bombing the negotiation table out of spite. Mr. Trump betrayed diplomacy and Americans who elected him.
Tehran says Washington deliberately entered a war of choice on behalf of Israel. Araghchi claims there was never any real Iranian threat and argues the conflict was triggered by US backing for Israeli military action, warning that the escalation is now costing lives on both sides.
Mr. Rubio admitted what we all knew. US has entered a war of choice on behalf of Israel. There was never any so-called Iranian threat. Shedding of both American and Iranian blood is thus on Israel firsters.
Washington, however, insists the strikes were necessary to prevent attacks on American forces. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the United States knew Israeli action would trigger retaliation and decided to act first to reduce potential casualties.
Obviously, we were aware of Israeli intentions and understood what that would mean for us, and we had to be prepared to act as a result of it. But this had to happen no matter what. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces, and we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties.
President Donald Trump has defended the military action, warning that Iran's leadership could have used nuclear weapons if they had the capability. Trump argued the strikes were necessary to prevent a larger catastrophe and stop what he described as a dangerous regime.
If we didn't hit within 2 weeks, they would have had a nuclear weapon. If we didn't do the B-2 attack a number of months ago, they would have a nuclear weapon. And when crazy people have nuclear weapons, bad things happen.
Russia has issued a serious warning over the escalating war in the Middle East. Speaking at an ambassadors' roundtable discussion, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the ongoing conflict involving Iran could trigger far-reaching global consequences. Moscow says the military campaign launched against Tehran risks destabilizing not just the region, but the entire international system. According to Lavrov, the situation unfolding in the Middle East is already causing major damage to civilian infrastructure and raising tensions across the Persian Gulf. Russia argues the conflict threatens global stability and could send shockwaves through the world economy.
What is now unfolding in the Middle East as a result of the aggression of the United States and Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran is really fraught with enormous consequences, negative consequences for the whole world, for world stability, for the world economy, for everything that was once called globalization in the name of the prosperity of all humanity. All this is destroyed, and peaceful citizens are suffering, both in Iran and as a result of the retaliatory actions of Iran in neighboring Arab states. We express our condolences to any victims among the world population.
Lavrov warned that the consequences of the war could extend far beyond the battlefield. According to Moscow, the campaign against Iran could end up triggering a dangerous nuclear domino effect across the Middle East. Russia says the logic created by the conflict may push countries to believe that nuclear weapons are the only real guarantee of national security. Lavrov argued that such a perception could fundamentally undermine the global non-proliferation regime.
This war that has now been started against Iran could undermine the foundations of the principles of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. More and more examples prove that if you do not have nuclear weapons, then you can do whatever you want with such a country. This can spur a movement in favor of developing nuclear weapons not only in Iran, but also in neighboring countries.
Russia also accused Western powers of deliberately destabilizing the Middle East through what Lavrov described as a strategy of division. According to Moscow, the military campaign risks driving a wedge between Iran and its Arab neighbors in the Persian Gulf. Lavrov said the region had recently seen signs of diplomatic normalization, including improved ties between Tehran and Gulf states. But the current war threatens to reverse that progress.
I have no doubt that one of the goals of this operation was to create a split between the countries of the region, between the countries of the Persian Gulf, Iran and its Arab neighbors, between which in recent years there has been a positive process of normalization. The West acts either with us or against us, and the main principle in all this is divide and rule.
Lavrov also claimed the conflict erupted at a moment when diplomacy between the United States and Iran was still underway. According to the Russian foreign minister, negotiations had produced encouraging signals, and there were realistic prospects for progress before the escalation occurred. Moscow says the outbreak of hostilities effectively derailed those diplomatic efforts.
Last Friday, the parties left Geneva making very positive and optimistic comments. I spoke with the foreign minister of Oman, who was acting as a mediator in these negotiations, and he confirmed that the American and Iranian delegations parted on a positive note, and that the substantive agreement was very, very realistic. Of course, it was necessary to continue, but instead the negotiations were interrupted.
The Russian foreign minister also rejected calls from some Gulf countries to condemn Iran alone for missile strikes in the region. Lavrov said, focusing only on Tehran's response ignores the broader context of the conflict. Moscow insists that any diplomatic effort must address actions by all sides involved in the war.
Simply saying that Iran has no right to do anything means that you are actually openly encouraging the United States and Israel to continue. We are in favor of stopping the aggression immediately, and we believe that there must be a united position that condemns actions leading to civilian casualties and destruction of civilian infrastructure.
Lavrov ended his remarks with a call for diplomacy and an immediate halt to military operations. Russia says the longer the war continues, the greater the risk of wider instability and nuclear proliferation across the Middle East. Moscow is urging the international community to push for a ceasefire and restart negotiations before the crisis spirals further. A Shahed-type drone has struck the British Royal Air Force Base at RAF Akrotiri on the Mediterranean island of Cyprus. The midnight strike hit the runway but caused only minimal damage, with no casualties reported. It is the first attack on the base in nearly 4 decades. British officials say the drone was Iranian-designed, but not launched from Iran, pointing instead to a possible proxy attack. The UK has since reinforced air defences across its regional bases and is deploying additional helicopters and missile systems to strengthen security. The strike has triggered alarm across Cyprus, where authorities are trying to reassure citizens that the country is not part of the escalating conflict. President Nikos Christodoulides addressed the nation, stressing that national security remains the government's top priority.
Compatriots, I am addressing all of you once again concerning the unprecedented crisis that erupted in our broader region, causing concern and uncertainty. Our primary concern, our highest and non-negotiable priority, is the security of our country and all of you.
Despite hosting a key British military installation, Cyprus insists it will not participate in any military operation. The government says the island will continue to focus on humanitarian efforts while remaining in close coordination with its international partners. The incident comes as tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran continue to escalate across the region. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has already signaled support for Washington, including allowing the use of British bases for defensive operations against Iranian missile threats. Ukraine's battlefield experience against Iranian Shahed drones may now play a role far beyond Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says several Middle Eastern countries have approached Kyiv seeking help in countering Iranian drone attacks. According to Zelensky, nations in the region facing waves of Shahed strikes want Ukraine's operational expertise developed after years of defending its cities and infrastructure from Russia's drone assaults.
The Iranian regime was supplying Russia with weapons, which Russia used to kill us. Now these concerns have somewhat diminished, as Iran is unlikely to be able to supply anything to Russia at the moment. But at one time, they transferred licenses, and now, based on these Iranian licenses, Russia is producing the corresponding missiles and drones itself.
Zelensky says the Iranian drone threat that Ukraine has been battling is now spreading across the Middle East. According to him, partners in the region have reported attacks by Iranian Shahed drones targeting civilians. Zelensky revealed that governments across the Gulf and the broader Middle East have reached out to Kyiv for advice and operational knowledge on how to counter these attacks.
We have received signals from partners in the Middle East. There have been attacks by Iranian Shaheeds on civilians in these countries. They want our expertise. We are open to this. If their representatives come, we will provide the expertise. Moreover, there are requests from Europeans and the United States of America. We have received requests to share our experience with partners from the Middle East.
The Ukrainian president says his country has developed practical solutions against mass drone attacks, including interceptor drones and layered air defense tactics. Zelensky argues that traditional missile systems, such as Patriot, are not designed to deal with large waves of cheap drones. Firing expensive interceptor missiles at every drone, he says, is simply not sustainable.
As for weapons, we are in a war ourselves. And I said quite frankly, we have a deficiency of what they have. They have missiles for Patriots, but they can't shoot down hundreds or thousands of Shaheeds with Patriot missiles. It's too expensive. Of course, they don't mind spending on people, but they simply don't have that many missiles. Therefore, they need interceptor drones, which we have. And we have a deficiency of RAS-2, RAS-3 missiles. So, if we talk about the exchange of technologies, the exchange of weapons, I think our country will be open to this.
Zelensky's remarks suggest a possible exchange of capabilities. Ukraine could provide its anti-drone expertise and interceptor drone technology, while partners in the region could help Kyiv with much-needed air defense missiles. The Ukrainian president says Kyiv is particularly short of interceptor missiles used in the Patriot air defense system. Zelensky also suggested that Russia could be indirectly helping Iran in the ongoing regional conflict. According to him, components of Russian origin may already be appearing in Iranian drones used in Middle Eastern attacks, while Moscow could potentially supply air defense systems to Tehran. For Kyiv, the message is clear. The drone war that once defined Russia's attacks on Ukraine is now becoming a central feature of the wider Middle East conflict.